Well, hello everyone. On today's video, we are going to cover the fence that we put around the garden, how we put it up, how it's holding up, and anything that we might do differently next time. So Bridget and I are going to take you on a little bit of a tour. Bridget decided to go inside. It's getting a little chilly out here, so she went in with Dr. Miller. So it's just going to be me taking you through the new fence. And before I take you on the tour of the new fence, let's talk about why we needed a fence in the first place. Last fall, I put a video up of the spring brassicas, kale collards, Brussels sprouts that I had put in the ground, that I had been growing with hopes of them being the plants that we were going to be harvesting from and eating our produce from all winter long, growing them, starting them in September, October, and then, seeing them through out until the spring. And that was going as planned until a groundhog decided to take residence right next to the garden and just started tearing everything apart. And it just so happened that I had a trip that took me to Nebraska for about a week, and by the time I got back, everything had been sawed down to about a nub by what was the groundhog, and then I also noticed that some rabbits were getting in on the action. And so we decided that there was a couple different things that we could do. One, we could trap the groundhog, trap the rabbits, and send them out. But what I've heard, and I've talked to some different DNR guys, is that if you start trapping one groundhog, then you forget about gardening because you're going to become a lifelong trapper. Because every time you remove a groundhog and relocate it, another one moves in its place. The same thing with the rabbits. And so that wasn't an option. We could have also put row cover over everything, and we use row cover for different applications to keep some insects off. But we decided that that wasn't really going to be necessarily a good option for putting them over the whole garden because they are kind of a pain to take off and put back on. So that wasn't going to be the case. And then lastly, there's another thing that you could do, and that is putting some sort of spray. There's organic ones that keep different deer or keep rodents away, or groundhogs and rabbits. But the problem is, the reason they keep those away so effectively is because they smell so horrible. And as we're eating produce from the garden, feeding our family with it, I really don't want to be putting smelly things around the garden. So those were not options, which meant that I was going to have to bite the bullet and put a fence in finally. Here we are next to the fence, and I'll just go through kind of the rundown of what I used to put it together and how it went up, and we'll go from there. The base of the fence is 2x3 white pine posts. In putting the fence up, we made a decision that this is probably not our forever home. So if we were going to be here for another 50 years, we probably would have invested more into some of the fence inputs, like getting some longer lasting posts. And also we decided not to cement anything in, because when we decided on how we were going to put the fence up, it was kind of a decision of making sure that we had enough of the garden put in the fence with room to grow, but also understanding that, hey, if we're here for a couple more years, I'm probably going to need more garden space, and meaning that I'm going to need to expand the fence, and I don't want it to be a huge pain. And also, if we do move, I don't want to have to be pulling big cement things up, because this does take a large part of the property up, and if someone were to move in, I wouldn't want this to be the reason that they didn't buy. Now, hopefully we sell to an avid gardener, but that just might not be the case. And so I decided not to cement the 2x3 posts in. What I did was just hard-packed clay. And many people have done this. It's been done for probably thousands of years in putting up any sorts of fence or any sort of barrier or posts. It's really just taking hard-packed clay, so wet clay, and packing it down as hard as I can with. I used another 2x3 to do it, but you could use a stick, a post hole tamper, anything like that would work fine. And that's how we supported these posts. And on top of the fence, you'll see here, we have, this is a 1x3, just a strip. It's not adding much other than it just kind of looks good. It also adds a little bit of stability there. I'm not expecting it to hold up if a black grizzly bear or a moose were to come by, but hopefully we're not seeing any of those anytime soon here. And so that's just there for looks. And the fence-wise, I had to make a decision on what I was going to use as the base fence, because I really had two factors in putting the fence up, and that was the lower ground covering critters like groundhogs and rabbits. Squirrels to a lesser degree, because really you're not going to keep any squirrels out other than maybe putting row cover over things or covering certain things that you're really worried about the squirrels. If squirrels want to get in, they're going to get in. But rabbits and groundhogs, we're keeping them out. So I went with a 4-foot tall chicken wire that I decided to leave about 4 to 5 inches a lip at the base. And so here we've got mulch that's growing, and so you can't necessarily see that. But I left a lip there on the inside. I took garden staples, which are about 4 to 6 inches long, drove them in every foot along the fence, which this is a 1/10 of an acre, so it did take a little while. But what that does is it secured the base to where nothing's really going to be able to crawl under, especially since I have my mulch here, 4 to 6 inches of mulch that I have surrounding the whole garden. But it also sturdied it up. So if you put up chicken wire, you're going to notice it's kind of loose, it's kind of flimsy. But adding those garden staples along the base really tightened it up. It's nice and taut, and if anything, it looks nice. And that's a big part of this whole thing too. Next, I took a piece of steel wire. This is just, you get it in like a mile long. I think this is a 12 or 15 gauge. Nope, I'm sorry, I think it's a 17 gauge wire. It's very thin. And I just intertwined it through the top of the chicken wire. And what that did was, if you leave chicken wire just to stand there on its own, or even if you staple it into the post, what you'll see is it kind of flimsy, it kind of hangs down, it's not really tight. And that might be okay, but I really wanted it to be nice and tight and look good. So I wound that all the way around, and then I'll take you on the other side so you can see what I did once I wound that wire around. You can see I have the fence that's been intertwined with the chicken wire, the wire that's running along the top. And then all I did was just took some fence staples. You just get them, they're about this long, and you hammer them in. And I hammered that in, securing every single post and piece of wire to it. And then I did that all the way around the fence. After running the wire all the way along the top of the chicken wire, I next turned my attention to the next critter or animal that we're trying to keep out of the garden, and that is deer. Now I understand that a 6 or 7 foot tall fence is not going to keep a deer out 100% of the time if it really wanted to get in there. If I really had a ton of deer pressure, I could always extend from the top and run another foot or 18 inches of wire running along the top. But as the bulk of the protection, I feel like these 3 wires, and again, this is that 17 gauge steel wire that I have running along, and these are at I think at 12 inches and 18 inches. So I didn't want anything to be able to just crawl in, and I didn't want anything to be able to jump in here. And so again, if we have any issues jumping over, we can always address it. But also, if you can see in the background there, we have different pots and different plants growing along the edges. And so what I've heard, and I've talked to a bunch of people about it, is that if the deer don't have a clear landing spot, then they're probably not going to be jumping into your garden area. And so that's the big thing. I am keeping them, making sure it's not easy for them to jump, and then also not giving them a clear landing spot. The last thing I had to do after running the wire around, running the chicken wire around, securing that all in place to the posts and the top boards, was add a door. And what I decided to do was make something